Thank you everyone to join us. And first of all, we want to say thank you, Professor Françoise Vergès, to join us and for being here. We are disappointed that this event takes online, but like everyone knows, we are in travel time and COVID time. So first of all, I'm here with my colleague Daphné Budasz. She's co-organizing this event and a Black Month at the UI. And we also have with us Justin Randolph Thompson, the founder of a Black History Month at the Florence, and which is the partner of these events also. Why we organize a Black History Month at the UI? This is the main question we ask a lot about ourselves. But this initiative is from the Black researcher from the History Department at the UI have decided to propose a series of events and activities as forming part of Black History Month. Those events are although as an opportunity to address the issue of Black people in Europe, a topic in which many members at the UI community have recently experienced interesting. The UI, European University Institute, is an international research institute where more than 700 doctoral and research and fellows, postdoctoral fellows from all over the world conduct the research in humanities. However, critical topics such as colonial legacy and race in Europe have only just begun to address within the institute. We as Black research has thought at the UI could be the most fertile ground to investigate to those topics. Those reason, together with a series of reflection, led us to think organize a Black History Month at the UI. So we believe that to attain a broad and balanced curriculum, scholars should be educated about different perspectives and how certain groups have contributed to the development of the knowledge, and especially the voice of experiences of Black people. One of the key goals in being a scholar is to have intellectual responsibility for our work, our job, at least for me. Therefore, even more so when it comes to the humanities studies, which have to power to influence many things like such as political, historical, and economics, and so on. Because Black history in our history is our history, whether we are white or not, whether we are research or not. Black history is integral and part of global history in the broadcast sense. Although Black history, there have always been crash and the concurrence topics such as colonialism and consequence of too often hidden from the history have left us important legacy that we have to face every day. In addition, this event is also conceived as an opportunity to strangle and to link between the UI and the city of Florence and the local cultural organizations such as Black History Month in Florence. So I want to ask if Justin would like to say something about the collaboration with this initiative. And welcome again. We have, after this brief introduction from Justin, we're waiting for discuss Daphné and Professor Françoise Vergès. Welcome. Justin?
Thank you so much for that introduction, for all of the work that you've done in organizing with the EUI on this collaboration. Black History Month Florence was born in 2016 as a way of creating a network of institutions, individuals, and associations that are interested in contributing to a collective conversation that is much needed in the context of Italy. This is a geocultural space where in reality there is no history on this territory that doesn't involve the African continent. And I think that it's really important to recognize those long-seated histories that I think a lot of times have been stripped from the record or have been unacknowledged. And I think that when it comes to the context of Europe more broadly in research, it's even more crucial. A lot of times as research institutions, I think there's a lot of times a bit of a struggle to try to connect, as you said, with the local community, with the city, to share the work that's being done behind the walls. And I think that Black History Month is a really wonderful moment to do that, to really open up and talk about some of the ways in which the research that we are doing is something that actually impacts the society around us. I'm really excited to have you all organizing with us. And I think that, for us, the more stimulation around the kind of self-organization within institutions that happens, the stronger the work that's being done results. And so I think I would just mention that on the website of Black History Month Florence, which is just blackhistorymonthflorence.com, you can find the full program, which involves organization that was done in Torino, in Bologna, in Milan, in Rome, and really puts together a network that I think helps us to also see how broad and how profound a reflection on Blackness can be in this context. And so it's really, for me, a hopeful moment in a moment of extreme difficulty to see this kind of organization coming together and to see the kinds of contributions that each institution brings. So we're really, really grateful for this collaboration and really, really honored to have tonight's speaker with us. And we hope to welcome you in our space, which is the Recovery Plan right here in the center of Florence in Via Santa Reparata. And we look forward to following more conversations like this. Thank you so much again, Daphne, and thank you, Fartun, for initiating this collaboration and for carrying it forth.
Thank you, Justin. And now the floor is for Daphne, and we're waiting for the lecture. Daphne?
Thank you. Thank you, Fartun. Thank you, Justin. And thank you, Professor Françoise Vergès, for being here with us today. As Fartun and Justin said, it's a real honor to having you, even only virtually, at the EUI and having you part of Black History Month Florence program. And given the high number of participants to this event today, I think this is my excitement is shared with a lot of people here. So I'll quickly say a few words about our speaker, and then I'll leave the floor to you. So Professor Françoise Vergès is a political scientist, an activist, and a public educator. She holds a PhD in political science from the University of California, Berkeley. She held the chair of postcolonial studies at the Collège d'Études Mondiales until 2018. She's the president of she is the president of, wait, you have to mute yourself, Justin. She is the president of the Comité pour la mémoire et l'histoire de l'esclavage, so the Committee for the Memory and the History of Slavery in France. She is also the co-founder of the collective Décolonisons les arts, decolonizing the arts, and she's a consulting professor at the Center for Cultural Studies at Goldsmiths College. Professor Françoise Vergès has extensively published in French and in English on postcolonial theory, French colonialism, Black feminism, slavery, and she's also a specialist of Frantz Fanon and Aimé Césaire. Her book, Un féminisme décolonial, has been published in France in 2019 and recently translated in English at Pluto Press under the title A Decolonial Feminism. That was last year in 2021. So this book is not only a critique of white feminism, but also a call for decolonizing knowledge production more broadly and to recognize the lasting consequences of colonialism in France and in European societies at large. So thanks again for having accepted our invitation. And now I turn the floor over to you.
Well, thank you so much. And hello to everyone. And I'm very happy to be part of this series in Black History Month. At what was being said before, effectively, there is still a lot to recover about the story about the African presence in Europe, and not just as enslaved or slave, but also as ambassador, musician, philosophers who were there in 15th, 16th century, and were not yet considered, belonging to sub-humanity. So there is a lot still to be done, a lot to be done also on the African continent and the diaspora. We have also to question also the weight of the Atlantic paradigm in this history. So we forget then the Indian Ocean and the eastern part of Africa, and therefore the connection between Africa and Asia, which is also open up incredible different question. So yes, it's extremely important, and there is still a lot of work to be done, but it's really has made incredible progress, essentially thanks to grassroots initiative or like yours, essentially. But this is good anyway, because otherwise it was coming from the institution, we may be afraid a little. So I was asked to, decolonial feminism, rethinking whiteness, Eurocentrism and gender. As Daphne was saying, when I wrote A Decolonial Feminism, it follows a book I wrote in 2017, which also have been published in English, called The Wombs of Woman, Race, Capital and Feminism, in which I analyze forced abortion and sterilization in the second half of the 20th century, even in the 1970s in Réunion Island, which is a French department, when at the same time in France you have the huge mobilization against the criminalization of abortion, and the state, the same state, was in France, wanting women to give birth, but in Réunion did not want women of color to give birth. And I did not see it as a contradiction, or not even as something all left over from colonialism, but of a political choice anchored in the 20th century politics in that moment, 1960s, 1970s. So how to look effectively at the afterlives, but in their current formation, about race, class, and gender. So following that, I started to still, I was also wanting more and more to criticize white feminism and European feminism, but going further, and not just borrowing from Black US feminism, which has been the tendency, but looking at what's happening in Europe and what Europe has done. The specific European formation of whiteness and the role of European colonialism and slavery. So it's not always, about what the state has done, because the formation are different in Europe, and it's very important to look at that. And also the civilizing mission that Europe had given itself, and how it's continued to this day, how the European community sees itself, how European Parliament still work as a civilizing mission agent, agent of civilizing. Even, that European Parliament sees itself as civilizing even the south of Europe, or the north of the east of Europe. Because when what is called Europe is Germany and France, and it used to be also England, but now England has decided to go her own way. But so even how this formation of Europe is a very narrow formation and rests on a very specific philosophy, very specific formation of the state, the specific idea of nationalness and citizenship. So that's just to say. And it started for me, decolonial feminism start with that question, which remained for me a very important question: who cleans the world? Who clean the world? Who make it possible for us every day? We can go to the office, we can drop the kid at school, we can visit someone in the hospital, we can go to the shop, we can go, everywhere, it's clean. It's clean. Otherwise, the society will not function. So I wanted also to take the question of cleaning outside of what white feminism has been looking at, like the domestic space. And like we have to share the laundry, why is the man not doing the laundry and not doing the cooking and should be sharing, the duties. I wanted to look at it as in fact, that as society became modernity, open modernity, this was more and more organized and rested on women of color, especially, of course, in the colony, but in the United States, on Black women doing that domestic work. And then after, in the second half of the 20th century, when Europe again, started to modernize itself after the war, again, like this organization of women. So not just Black and brown women of color working in the bourgeois house, but, the woman who clean the hotel room. I mean, that effectively there is, we could do a kind of ghost body to the white body, performing every day, the gym, the health, all the things that the performing a white bourgeois body must do, and go to, to the hotel and have sex or not, or having the friend and having, all this is made possible because there is a body beyond, that is, and, that is doing that, making that possible. Otherwise, it will not be possible. So the performing body as a double, if we want to say, and with Black mostly, but also brown, and is doing, making that possibility. And so the healthy white body is the health, the performance is made possible because of the exhaustion of the body of color. The woman, when I was working with the women on strike, they're on strike we're on strike in the hotel in Paris or the railway station, and I followed some of them. They have to do like 2 hours of transportation every day, so they have to wake up at 4 a.m. So they arrive at their job at 7 a.m. Then they will have to do sometimes 3 jobs in a row, cleaning 15 rooms here and going to clean another, or if they clean the railway station 1, 2, 3, one after the other. Transportation is not being, is not calculated in the hours they're doing, but quite quickly they have to have surgery on their knees, on their arms. Their body is exhausted, psychically also, the stress, the fatigue. They go home and they still have to do, or also cook for the family. So this economy of exhaustion, the extraction of the force, of the life force of a woman of color, so that the white body can be healthy, and live well. Which we saw also a lot with the pandemic, when there was a lockdown, and suddenly, all these bourgeois people discovered the essential work, that effectively you have to have cashier, you have to have, people who deliver the food or deliver things, and that suddenly, became hero. This was quite quickly forgotten, but this was the moment. So who cleaned the world? And this for me was, if we started from that situation, and we ask ourselves how cleaning can, will be a decolonial work. What will be a decolonial revolution? Transform, because the world has to be clean, right? We need to, every day, we cannot go walk through, but what will it mean? And if we have that question, it's not just, therefore, just a gender question, and because someone has to do the job, someone has to clean, and it has been organized so that it's people of color. And of course, some men of color perform, pick up garbage in the street, but even according to the World Organization of Labor, the cleaning industry is 80% women of color. So it's, all over the planet. So that was my first question. And then through that, the second question for me, it was how, vulnerability to premature death is being fabricated, taking Bruce Wilson Gilmore analysis of racial capitalism as the fabrication of differentiated vulnerability to premature death. So you are born, that some people are born and they are already condemned to premature death, not because of disease, but the life they are going to live, the condition of living, the work they will do, will lead to premature death. And we saw that also again in the pandemic, where, you know, that all the comorbidity cause, diabetes, heart problem, were greater in the community of color than in the white community. So this is what I talk, you know, it's what I mean by that. So gender equality cannot confront this question. We have to look at the structure, you know. And so again, what makes the good life possible in the sense of, you know, the white good life, what is needed, and then what is naturalized, you know, the exploitation being naturalized. This is the way the, you know, must be done. And how then whiteness, a third point for me, you know, when I was looking at that whiteness, what is the history of whiteness with feminism? And the way how women constructed themselves as white. When it happened, how this was consolidated, what happened, and how it was important. So it was not just whiteness, but how whiteness is also different, you know, according to men and women. And how, so in 18th century, when white feminists declared themselves, we are the slave, we are like the slave, you know, the slave women are our sisters, they use the question of male domination and masculine domination as, you know, that therefore, since they were, that they're dependent on that their father or brother or husband could make decisions for them and they could be exchanged, that was like slavery. Of course, they forgot that, you know, there was no deportation. There was not, for instance, you know, that they were forbidden to make family, which is the case under slavery. There was, you know, you could not make family. Black were, you know, forbidden to make family. And of course, the question of race. So this, for me, was already a question. And how you could be anti-slavery and still being racist. So anti-slavery did not mean being anti-racist. So you could be absolutely anti-slavery, and there were feminists anti-slavery. They did not mean being anti-racist. So so abolitionism did not mean being anti-racist in Europe. I mean, European abolitionism, like for instance, anti-colonial, being anti-colonial in the 20th century did not mean to be anti-racist either. So you could be anti-colonial in the name of rights, in the name of the, you know, the right of people to be independent, but that did not mean you wanted them to be equal to you know, to your people. So again, how this was, you know, the fact that you could be that, and when the left, for instance, when women in the left tell me we were against colonialism, I say, yes, you were against colonialism, but not for equality. You were not for equality, you were not, you know, because if you had been for equality, you will have fought against the capitalist system, which still, you know, produce inequality on the global scale. So this, but I mean, to go back a little, also for me, the fact that very, very, very few European feminists were against colonization, practically none. They were critical of the way colonization was made, but they were not critical of colonization because they saw it as progress for women, you know, that effectively, you know, African women in barbarism or, you know, Muslim women being locked into the harem. So it was very important. But at the same time, they were not that important. They were not instrumental. They were not central to colonization. Of course, they play a role, but they were not central. The central role of white feminism in colonization, I mean, in neoliberalism and imperialism, came in the second half of the 20th century. We cannot say that in the 19th century, women were very extremely important in the colonial project. Of course, they were part of the narrative, they were part of the discourse, but they were not active. Even when they were writing books saying we are for colonization, they were not the book that were told, they were not the book that educated the society in being colonial society. And also, European feminism also never looked, when I say that they could be anti-colonial without being anti-racist, what Aimé Césaire described in Discourse on Colonialism, what he called the boomerang effect of slavery and colonialism. The fact that he said that you cannot colonize, you cannot enslave, and have the racial law over there without it coming back and to contaminate it, even revolutionary ideology. So in 1956, when he resigned from the French Communist Party, he said, okay, he talked to the communists, to his comrades, and he said, you want me to be communist? I mean, it's okay, but you cannot accept that I'm Black. And me, I am a Black man, and I cannot erase that. I cannot ignore it. And that brings something different than just being a communist, And then he say, that you are for fraternity, but as long as you are the big brother, and I am the little one. So he brought within the question of communism and equality for all, the fact that in fact that as long as you were blind to the boomerang effect, to the way in which race was, through which class could be thought as short, or I say, they did not want to look. And of course, there was Frantz Fanon also when he said that the colonial policy would get the woman and everything will follow. Separate the woman from their community, decide that the women are oppressed in their community, and that then European democracy and European human rights will save them, will protect them, will make them autonomous and free. And this, of course, we see it against today, very much so from Europe. So the how whiteness, did not see liberation as a necessity, as the Cambrai River Collective said in their famous text, how, you have to look at the system of oppression as interlock, not necessarily intersectionality, but interlock, how this work together, how this being connected. Not necessarily that people sit around the table, men sit around the table and say how we're going to make that, but how nonetheless, even if there are tension between the state and patriarchy and other institutions, there was a creation of a hostile environment to women of color and to Black women. And it was for me, what was extremely really revealing, it was white feminists who provided the vocabulary of Islamophobia in Europe. Without white feminism, the vocabulary of Islamophobia would not have been that powerful. They provided the vocabulary, they provided the argument by saying that Islam was threatening women's rights, that veiled woman was, in fact, by being veiled, it was an attack on women's rights, on all the victory that European women had won, in the second half of the 20th century. And they offer it to the left, and to the right in Europe. And what is important, it was women from the left who provided that vocabulary. It was not conservative women. It was women who had been associated with women's liberation movement in Germany, like Alice Stresser, or women in France, like Giselle Halimi, or women in Italy. Feminists, really, historical feminist figure provided that discourse. So it did not come from the right. And then the right, of course, thought, oh, that's a great idea, let's have it. But, and it was very important because it legitimated Islamophobia. It gave, to Islamophobia, the fact that being, really Islam is a threat to women's rights. And it's also by transforming women's rights as a central, as in fact the basis for a civilization. And you could then, how can I say, identify a culture and a people by the role that, by the how they reach women's rights or not. That was, then you could, then they were a scale and they would be there and there. So Afghanistan, for instance, was totally at the bottom, and this could justify, armed intervention. So suddenly, and remember what Hillary Clinton said in Beijing at the end of the UN decade of women. She said women's rights are human's rights. And that was the moment when human rights discourse entered also in terms of intervention, the justification, legitimation of, attacking sovereign state in the name of saving human rights. So the role that women's rights took in neoliberalism and imperialism by at the beginning of the 21st century was very important. Of course, these are not coherent systems. It's not like, again, men sitting around a table and say how we're going to do, to really dominate. But the whole, the state, the NGO, the foundation, for instance, like the Gates Foundation, very, very important in Africa right now. The multinational, patriarchy, feminists, they are not necessarily, all together agreeing, but they create, by their different way of approaching, they all create an hostile environment to Black women and women of color. It's really, and so the way gender is being pushed, gender equality is being used. There is not today a program in the South, in the global South, in which you do not have a chapter on gender equality. This is even required, because when I met some, investigation around that, a lot of people, NGO, were telling me, if we don't put a chapter on gender equality, we don't receive the money. So how is was important? I mean, it's absolutely central. So this was important to analyze. On the one hand, incredible increased vulnerability of women in the global South and of Black women, right? In terms of health, in terms of, access to education, in terms of, the violence, the question of violence. So increased vulnerability, increased fragility, increased precarity. The war, for instance, in Iraq, in Syria, and, in the situation in Libya, all this, and, like really incredible violence. So on the one hand, increase vulnerability, and that goes with much constant talk about women's rights. And they are not, it's not in opposition, it's because women's rights understood in your, in the European neoliberal imperialist way, mean pacification. Does not mean liberation and emancipation. I mean, how are we going to crush radical movement? How are we going to crush Black Lives Matter? How are we going to, so this is how through women's rights. So it's a perfect PR, public relations things also for neoliberalism and imperialism. I mean, if I take the French example, because of the pandemic, I've been in France much more than I used to be. I remember that 3 years ago, the president of France, Emmanuel Macron, said again that you can give all the money you want to Africa, to the African continent, and to to Black people. They will never really make progress because Black women are making too many children. So that was 3 years ago, right? That was 3 years ago. He could, declare that. So the constant, like we are the civilizer. We are coming to civilize. This is what whiteness is about. Whiteness is about not only what we call privilege. It's not so much privilege, but it's a position that you've taken. But it's really connected with this idea of we are the civilized, and our duty is to civilize, because civilization is good. Civilization is about, respect for the people, democracy, and all this. So, everyone would want it, and we know it. We know it because we are the one who invented it. So this is our duty in the world. So the last thing I would want to say before opening to the conversation is also, for instance, how we are fighting. I mean, I say we people, people of color and people against invisibility, and how do we write our own history? Is right. So it's a question, because for a while I work, even when I was president of the committee for the memory and history of slavery, or then I did some intervention also about colonial history. And it was okay. These are forgotten chapter. So, or forgotten figure. Let's talk about them. But then I said to myself, but by doing that, I'm not changing the frame of the narrative. I'm just asking for inclusion. Like, okay, let's have don't forget about slavery. Don't forget to put that in the textbook, or don't forget about this. But then the frame, the narrative, the way you tell the story, the way the word you use do not change. So then I say, okay, I have to, so I drop this, I say, okay, I'm going to stop to do that in that way. And I have to work much more on how effectively we're going to, what is visibility for people of color? What is visibility? What is to make ourselves visible? And how visibility goes connected with right and citizenship and sovereignty, but in different way than the Western understanding of that. So this is also in terms of history, because history is important. How do we forge other way? Not necessarily that we have to use fiction more than, it's because after all, fact and dates can matter. For instance, I don't know, the victory of the Algerian people or the victory of the people in Guinea-Bissau matter, or the fact that Black Lives Matter 2 years ago became a global movement. It does matter. But the point is how, nonetheless, you tell the story also, not through the big figure or the leadership. But it's not just that. It's not just, making things, reversing things. Is how do you make history by talking about also the joy that the building collective bring, the force, the courage that it gives you. That is not just about making it right, but also giving the possibility of some happiness and joy in a world which is so, devoid of joy and happiness. So how do you provide all this moment also of this incredible, that hope is not just about, okay, one day we will be free, but right now I am with my sister and brother and we are, we are having fun, because struggle can be effectively a source of incredible hope and courage. So this different point I wanted, to bring to the conversation of how do whiteness, Eurocentrism, and gender, and the importance of decolonial feminism in Europe today. So because, not we, because I'm not in Europe right now, but, if we are in Europe, what is to be a decolonial feminist in Europe? Not, because we're there right now, or not, we are not, So what is it to have a decolonial feminism in Europe? So what is a decolonial feminism when we are a Black woman and women of color in Europe? So how do we carve our own autonomy? How do we build our own sovereignty in a land of which is a colonial land, is a racialized land? So how do we build that? How do we decolonize ourselves and effectively build refuge and sanctuaries, decolonial refuge and sanctuaries for ourselves, so we can think, we can imagine what must be done, imagine way of doing it. How do we do that? Because this is where we are, and and so how do we gonna change it? And after the conversation, I can talk about effectively how, for instance, I was, some white feminists in France and telling me, but what can we do? What should we do? And so on. I said, but you can do a lot. They wanted to serve women in Afghanistan somewhere. I said, let the women there, do what they have to do, but do what you have to do. And what you have to do is to work on your own decolonization. And this is not a job of Black women and women of color. This is your job. You have to see how you're going to do that. It's, you have to think, sit down and think. And also you can also act in a very concrete way against your state, because your state is a state that provides the bomb on in Afghanistan or Iraq or elsewhere, or Yemen, and so your state contribute to the misery of women in the global south and of Black women. So what do you have to do? So look at, how your state, and not somewhere else, your state is doing it, and how you're going to stop it here, what you're going to do to effectively stop your state of continuing oppressing Black people and exploiting them and dispossessing them and expropriating them. And this is what you can do right now. This is what, and this is how you will dismantle whiteness, not by talking about endlessly, and I'm sorry to be white. That does not, it's not very interesting. I think I have gone much over my 20 minutes. I'm very sorry.
No, this was great. Thank you so much for this really fascinating talk. And I will start by, I have some thoughts and some questions, and I will start, and then we'll open, after my intervention, we'll open the floor to anyone who would like to ask you a question or make a comment. Yeah, I really found it fascinating the way, you make the differentiation pretty clear between like anti-colonialism, anti-slavery, abolitionism, feminism, and anti-racism, making it clear that it's not necessarily goes together. And I also found, in your talk, but also in your book, obviously, how, you show the colonial legacy of French white feminism, and I was thinking, because you were talking about, how women's rights have been appropriated to justify neo-imperialism and neoliberalism. And also, the term feminism and feminist as well has been used, now everybody is feminist, not everybody, but, far-right women can be feminist, like a lot of people can be feminist. Well, like few decades during the so-called like second wave feminism, being a feminist had a much more radical sense, even though it was white feminism, and I was wondering if you think that there is a risk that, this decolonial term and this decolonial movement that we're trying to develop in Europe has the risk of falling into the same path or having the same fate in a way, because I have the impression, not so much in Italy and maybe not so much in France so far, but in the UK a bit more, you have a lot of decolonizing initiative, especially within the universities, and sometimes it's kind of lack a bit the sense of what do we actually mean by decolonizing. It become like, this kind of general term we use, everything being decolonial, and then it's like a bit, it's like it can be reused for a lot of things, and yeah, it basically losing the radicality of it, and there is no more anti-imperialist, anti-capitalist agenda behind. Sometimes it's just also reduced to, the promotion of diversity, which is obviously like a really good thing to do, but, diversity is also really sometimes empty concepts. So wondering, my first question was like, what do you think there is a risk like decolonial or decoloniality will, follow the same kind of, pattern, like becoming reappropriated by, what we don't think is right. And then I have another question, maybe more about the specificity of the French context, because France has a particular relation to its colonial past, but also to, to post-colonial theories and post-colonial studies. And probably you know that, but I don't know, not everybody is so familiar with the French context, but as soon as last month in January, there was like this really awkward colloquium organized at the Sorbonne, that was, so it was I'm just explaining that for the others, like that was a colloquium that was opened by the education minister, Michel Blanquer, and it was a 2-day event that brought together a set of scholars, but it was mostly, let's say, elderly, not so active scholars and conservative ones. who were attacking the decolonial thought known as woke or cancel culture, and I'm quoting. And the event was entitled Après la déconstruction, reconstruire la science et la culture. So basically after the deconstruction, rebuilding science and culture. And it was, and it really kind of reflects this, I don't know, hostility that you have in France, but also elsewhere for this kind of approach. So I was wondering, I mean, how, first, your opinion on that, and how specific to France do you think this kind of like, you know, hostility is? And maybe also then, because maybe I would be interested to know if you think, regarding to this question, that you have a different reception of your work in English than in French, because your book has just been published last year, like translated in English. And I was wondering, in like, I don't know, reviews or all the events you've been taking part of, you have, you experience a different reception according to this kind of specific national context. And then the last but not least reflection I was having when we were talking about, you know, the COVID crisis that made it even more, I mean, there is this paradox of like, you know, this, you're talking about this invisibility of these non-white bodies doing this necessary job of specifically cleaning. And of course, the COVID crisis made it clear for like in the past 2 years that cleaning became our first preoccupation in life. We've been sanitizing everything all day long. And I was wondering, because you said in your talk that like the COVID crisis made it kind of visible that we needed these bodies, but then forgotten again. And I think, for what I know, I had the impression we talked a bit more about people like working for the hospitals, like in the like nurses, but the cleaning staff, the women you're talking about, were not so much made visible, and of course they have been forgotten if they were. And so I was wondering if you think that still the COVID crisis could have or had a potential like positive impact on making these people more visible, and this and this like specificities of the experience of Black women in France or elsewhere more visible.
Very good. Thank you very much. Very good question. Okay. The risk of decolonial to fall into some new brand, some new commodity, of course, it's already there. It's already there. In France also, everything is being decolonized now. It's part of the glamour. And especially, you know, because effectively, but I connect it with extraction. We are still providing ideas, things like that. And of course, it's totally transformed, you know, decolonial totally transformed in their hand. But it's nonetheless, oh my God, it's a new thing, you know, it's like, oh God, you know, we discover coffee, we discover gold, whatever, oh, it's the decolonial. So we have to look at it as an incredible, deep logic of extraction. Extracting, it's not about just extracting my, you know, precious stones or whatever. It's also extracting from the body, of course, the light, but also extracting ID and extracting, you know, everything. Because in a way, it's a world without a lot of imagination, you know. And right now, there is a certain exhaustion of imagination in Europe, you know, because you go around and around with the same thing in art or whatever, and you go again, our great men and Kant and Sartre and so on, and you know, constantly like that. So this is new blood, if we could say, you know, it's in the way like new world being discovered and bringing some new energy to the old world, you know. So there is still something of that, of the extraction. And then the answer will be also diversity and inclusion. I mean, the business world is very much about diversity now. You know, if you read Financial Times or Les Echos or whatever, you know this, they are absolutely promoting diversity. They say this is what we must do in the business world. Capitalism must become diverse, more diverse. So there is a moment in which we're effectively entering, not everyone, of course, but entering some people of Black and people of color within capital and within the institution, at the head of institution, will be okay. And in France, we already see it. And in England, look at England, a lot of ministers, Priti Patel, or, you know, like, these are absolutely people of color, and they prove themselves to be the good servant of racial capitalism and imperialism. So we have at one point effectively to revise what we understood by representation. They do not represent us. They represent effectively why a Black person or, you know, a person of color will not in fact adopt total neoliberalism, will not be a racist. Why do we think that, you know, by naturally, of course, more, it's really about, you know, the consciousness you have about your oppression and the desire to change. Otherwise, you can be seduced. You can really be seduced. Power, I mean, they offer you something. I mean, power offer you something, you know, and you want to be part of it, part of, you know, this world that, and the glitter. So diversity now, yes, it's a neoliberal multiculturalism that we saw in England. A new Labour understood it much earlier than the French. The French left is understanding what Tony Blair understood, you know, like way back. So of course we have that. And when you are talking about the French context and the colonial past and the colloquium and all the attack about, again, the Islamo-lefties, against decolonial, against gender, you know, all this, you know, all these things. That there is what is specific, I mean, specific now in France with neoliberal France, is what Macron called en même temps, his doctrine of at the same time. You know, it's at the same time, and that's the doctrine. So on the one hand, you send the police against, you know, the yellow jacket, police crime women, and, you know, unpunished, and there is total impunity. So that, and on the other hand, you make a lot of discourse. You invite African young people to Montpellier. You do a show about that. You're listening to them. You let them even practically tell you that you are an imperialist. And it's okay. It's okay. It's part of the theater. So there is a theater of that. And there is not the kind of frontal thing that used to be. And it was, again, the same thing for feminism. When feminism no longer, you know, could effectively be that any right wing or anyone could become a feminist, there was effectively, you could become a feminist. So what I will say is, like, with that is it's constantly saying, this is what I mean by feminism. This is what I mean by decolonial. So you have your decolonial, you have your feminism, what kind of, you know, okay. But this is not what we are fighting for. So when you bring anti-racism, anti-capitalism, anti-imperialism, then they don't follow you. They don't follow you. So when feminism is connected with radical change, they don't follow you. If feminism is connected just with women's rights, you know, being nice and everything, or that it's normal that women should be in banking and elsewhere, that's okay. Of course, we'll not be all women, but it's, yeah, it can be. And the last things about the COVID crisis and making it more visible. Well, I will say, what is visibility then? Because you make things visible does not mean necessarily that they're going to change, that things going to change. And that was made visible, nothing changed. Nothing has changed. Black women exploited. All this work done, the essential delivery boys, you know, cash and so on, they are very precarious. They are not, they are, some of, I mean, they don't have the right to unionize, you know, I mean, there is a lot of repression. So we have to understand what visibility, what do we mean by that? You know, because there are two things I would want to say. First, sometimes what is called invisible is not invisible. You know, it's there. It's there. You know, for instance, all the guards in the mall in France or even here, you know, are Black, right? You see them, they are not invisible. You don't walk in them. You know, it's not the invisible man, right? You go around. But the fact that you see them, so they are not invisible, does not lead you to change the things. So what is seeing that matter? What do you see that seeing makes sense and lead you to understand, to analyze? But if it's seeing remain that, oh yes, I see that, but in fact you see, but you don't see. You see what is under, because you see, I mean, you have been, you have been taught, okay, this is a piece of paper. So you say, okay, this is a piece of paper. But, what is a piece of paper about? And what is this, what will going to be the role of this piece of paper in the world? Is it the act of selling a human being? Is it an agreement to signing, between two multinationals? Is it a manifesto for revolution? What is this piece of paper? Because I see the piece of paper, but what is going to be, what is written on it, what's going to be told, how it's going to be circulated, is something else. So the question of visibility, we have to be careful because we get caught into visible and invisible. And when a lot of things are not invisible, poverty in the world is not invisible. The effect of war are not invisible. We can see them, but we do not make sense of them. I mean, not the full sense of it. We say, oh, that's very sad, but that's not the same thing as acting. So how do we train our sense again so that what we see it leads us to be more, to ask questions about what we see. Why is it like that? Why do I see? What is it? It's not a scene, in the sense, it's not an image. Or even if it's an image, what do I see? Who made it, and what is that? My last book, it's called On Colonial Violence in the Public Space, and it's about the naturalization of the hostile environment that is built by city. Cities are made for rich and valid men, right? Now not made by women. I mean, there is constant curfew for women. We don't have to wait for COVID. There is the streets are hostile to Black, are hostile to queer, are hostile to Arab. Young men and young Black men and young Arab men know that some neighborhoods are forbidden to them, and especially after a certain hour. They know that some places are forbidden to them. The city is full of statues of white men that are the sentinel, that are, reminding you of where you're walking and to whom the city belongs. There is a racial, social, gender segregation in city. So, and it's visible, you even know yourself that there are some places you will not get in if you're a young queer or young Black person, or, no, not necessarily young. And so this is naturalized, that hostile environment is being naturalized. So the point is, like, what we see is not enough. Because if we don't look at it as being totally unnatural, has nothing to do with, this is not, this is made, is a result of political choice. So it can be unmade. So visible and visible is not enough. And also, one more thing about invisible, there are moments in which we have to be invisible. You have to hide from power. You have to go underground. You cannot show all your cards. There are things you don't say. There are things you lie. You learn to lie. You learn to go around. You don't, because they say, oh, speak, we'll listen to you. There is even, you should speak. The colonized should speak. The refugee must have a narrative to be accepted. And the narrative has to be a specific narrative. If you remain silent, you're not going to get your papers. You're not going to get your papers. You have to tell a story. And the story has to fit within, oh, yes, it's still the civilizing mission. We're going to civilize you. We can be accepted.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your answer. I will now like to open the floors to anyone who would like to ask a question. I think the way we'll do it is like you